Okay, the recording has started. The time is 4:33 p.m. and this is the Sunshine Ordinance Task Force Compliance and Amendments Committee meeting. In accordance with Governor Newsom's executive order declaring a state of emergency regarding COVID-19 outbreak and Mayor Lyndon Breed's proclamation declaring a local emergency issued February 25th, 2020, including the guidance for gathering issues by the San Francisco Department of Public Health Officer, aggressive directives were issued to reduce the spread of COVID-19. On March 17, 2020, the Board of Supervisors authorized their boards and committees meetings to convene remotely and will allow remote public comment via video conference. Give me a moment. Members of the public may participate by phone or may submit their comment by email to cheryl.leger@sfgov.org. All comments received will be made a part of the official record. Sunshine Ordinance Task Force agendas and their associated documents are available on sfbos.org/sunshine. Medium decorum. Any members of the Sunshine Ordinance Task Force may call for decorum due to disorderly conduct of meeting participants. Person who engage in threatening and or menacing behavior may be asked to leave. The first item on the agenda is item number 1, call to order, roll call, and agenda changes. We did call the meeting to order. I believe that I would like to note that Miss Neighbor is unable to attend today's meeting, and our chair, Bruce Wolf, is sitting in her place. And we do have our chair and member Lila LaHood chair and Jennifer Wong are in attendance today. I do not know of any agenda changes at this time.
I do not know of any agenda changes. Does anyone else have anything? Nope. Do we need to call roll, or are you just recognizing our attendance?
In a way, I sort of called roll for you.
Okay, we are all here. Please call the next item.
I guess you can say we note a quorum for the record.
We note a quorum. There we go.
Yes, I jumped the gun. Next on the agenda is item number 2, approval of the February 22nd I believe that might be an error on the agenda. It should be February 22nd, 2022 Compliance and Amendments Committee meeting minutes. As the agenda is, or as the minutes are attached, I don't believe that's an issue.
Yes, I don't believe that's an issue, but I did not catch that before. I will note one thing I noticed in the minutes, and then I'd like to hear from the other members if they saw anything else. In item number 4 for file number 21054, in the third or second paragraph above the action, it says recorded in HER. I think that's was referring to EHR, which are electronic health records.
Could you repeat that location again, please?
Yes.
I wasn't.
So in item number 4, which is file number 21054, in the third paragraph, there's the capital letters HER. Mm-hmm. Which I think is referring to the it's the electronic health record. So EHR, it's the city's EHR system, which is called EPIC.
Mm-hmm. I will go ahead and just spell out electronic health records and remove HER.
Yeah, electronic health record system, I think, would be the simplest way to avoid confusion.
Yes. I have made that note.
Members, did anyone else note any changes we need or anything that need to be clarified in the minutes?
I have a question about item number 6, file number 22007. It's on page P5. After anonymous, it says PAN. What's that reference?
Oh. I don't know.
Sorry, PAN?
And yeah,
Well, I thought that was
November.
I thought that was the identifier for the anonymous person, similar to anonymous number 3.
Yeah, so that is something that we have started to do. There's so many anonymouses out there that we are putting the first 3 letters of their email address after the word anonymous, just so we know which anonymous it is. Because we were getting them confused, sending the wrong emails to people, and so that is something I devised to identify the anonymouses.
As long as it's not identifiable enough for somebody to figure it out.
Well, the email address is public knowledge in the complaint, and that is what we're using, just the first 3 letters of the email address.
Okay. Got it.
Thank you. That makes sense. That's very helpful. Members, anything else about the minutes?
I wasn't at the meeting, so I won't make the motion, but I'll second it.
Member Wong, would you like to make a motion?
Sure. I'll make a motion to approve the February 2022 minutes, and with that small correction to change HER to electronic health record.
System.
Okay, and Member Wolf seconds, or Chair Wolf. Mr. Young, let's open this up for public comment on the February minutes.
Yes, are there any members of the public who would like to provide public comment on this matter?
I'm Patrick. I'd like to comment, please.
Okay, please proceed.
Okay. Thank you for pointing out the typo of the HER. It's a anomaly in Microsoft Word autocorrect that it changes EHR to HER. When you enter a space, it automatically corrects it, changing it to her instead of EHR. So thank you for noting that. I'd also like to ask for some corrections in the minutes. In the second paragraph,
One moment, if you don't, I'm going to pause your timer right now. Give me a moment. Sorry. I just want to be sure I am looking at what you're saying so that I can so note if needed. Okay, please proceed.
Okay, so in that same item, number 4, the second paragraph that starts out with Patrick Monette Shaw, on the 6th line, there's another typo. Instead of it saying Epic's Medical Relations Departments, plural, it should be Epic's Media Relations Department, singular. So instead of medical, it should be media. And then just after the word department on line 7, you should add before the words discharge data, in between departments and discharge, it should be insert informed Monette Shaw that, and then the discharge data is stored in Epic's patient module. In between the word patient and module, you should insert the word flow so that it reads patient flow module. And that's the end of my corrections. But as a comment on the minutes itself, as an aside, in the following paragraph, Mr. Rapfin incorrectly advised this committee that the name and addresses of facilities patients are discharged to are not stored in discrete quote unquote discrete, meaning structured or unique database fields in Epic that is patently incorrect and the exact opposite of what I was told by Epic's Media Relations Department, who asserts and told me
Speaker time
that
has elapsed.
the Media Relations Department, in fact, told me those are in unique database fields, not a single memo field. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minette Shaw. I believe we've reached the end of your time for comment on the minutes.
All right, thank you.
Are there any other public commenters on the minutes? Hearing none, would the mover like to accept the additional recommended amendments?
Mr. Young, I'd like to do one last thing. I just want to remind anyone on the call that if you need to unmute yourself, press *6 or press *6 to remute yourself. Could we do one last call for public comment? I know especially at the beginning of the meeting, sometimes people get confused and they may be trying to speak. Okay, hearing no public comment, yes. Members, any additional comments on this motion? Mr. Young, I would like to take the corrections that were offered by the speaker on that particular sentence. I believe that the clarifications made sense to me. Were you able to get those?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Would the mover like to accept those additional corrections? That would be Member Wong.
Yes,
Would the
please.
seconder agree? That would be
Yes.
Member Wong. Okay, the mover and seconder agrees to the motion change. So would you like me to take a vote on that motion at this time?
Yes, please.
Yes, on that motion. Member Wong.
Aye.
Wong, aye. Member Wolf.
Aye.
Wolf, aye. Chair LaHood.
Aye.
LaHood, aye. The motion passes without objection.
Thank
Next
you.
on the agenda. Oh, sorry.
No, that was it. Thank you.
Next on the agenda is item number 3, public comment. Members of the public may address the committee on matters that are within the committee's jurisdiction, but not on today's agenda.
Do we have anyone who would like to make public comment? We can create a queue. Again, if you have been muted, you'll need to press *6 to unmute yourself. But then we ask that you also press *6 to mute yourself after you're done speaking. Would anyone like to make general public comment?
Anonymous number 3.
You're
Yes,
first
again.
in line. Please go ahead. Sorry, so the next who else spoke? We heard anonymous number 3. Would anyone else like to make public comment after anonymous number 3?
This is Patrick. I would like to make general public comment as well.
Okay, you'll be next in line. Is there anyone else who would like to make general public comment? Okay, Mr. Young will let you know when he is ready with the timer. Mr. Young, please go ahead.
Anonymous 3, you may begin.
Thank you very much. This is anonymous number 3. 2 different comments. One, this isn't actually about the minutes from last time. It's about the case from last time, so I'm saying it now. In file 21152, the HSA IT agency claims to tell you falsely that the record retention policy for Teams chats is 30 days and that policy is citywide. That is false, because I've actually sunshined these retention policies themselves as stored as settings inside Microsoft Teams. Different agencies set retention policies differently. Most interestingly, the mayor's office, portions of it set the retention policy to a much, much shorter time, so you can't retrieve any of their chat messages. And I'm sure that'll come up in various fashion for my complaints against various city agencies. Second comment is a question. This committee looked at one of my complaints that had already received a full order against the city and referred the matter back to the full task force, with recommended additional violations and a referral to the Ethics Commission. And this was about SFPD not retaining records at the time they were requested, and thus violating the law further. And I don't know what has happened to it. That happened many, many months ago. I was wondering what happened to SOTF file 19098, I believe is the number. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Manette-Shaw, you may begin.
Thank you. This is just a general question. I know most policy bodies and task forces do not have to respond to questions, but I'm curious about whether the budget supplemental request that Chair Wolf submitted to the Board of Supervisors has had any traction lately, particularly now that Budget Chair Haney had been replaced way back in February, ostensibly so he'd have more time to campaign for the Assembly. Board President Walton replaced Haney, and I'm wondering if there's been any movement on a supplemental appropriation for the current fiscal year, and whether we should be resurrecting our efforts to submit testimony to the Board of Soups in support of either a supplemental for the current fiscal year or advocating that the next fiscal year budget incorporate that additional funding for the task force. Thank you.
Thank you. That being the last of our listed public commenters, is there anybody else who would like to provide public comment at time? We have two other callers on the line. Hearing none, can we close public comment at this time?
I'd just like to quickly respond to the last speaker. I will have an update on that at the May meeting, which will be next week.
Thank you, Chair Wolf. And the agenda will be posted soon. Next item, please.
Yes, next on the agenda is item number 4, file number 20059, complaint filed by Anonymous against the Department of Public Health for allegedly violating admin code section 62.25 by failing to respond to a IDR in a timely and complete manner. On April 6, 2022, the SOTF found the Department of Public Health in violation of 67.21b, 67.25, and 67.26. The task force ordered the department to turn over the remaining records on a rolling basis and referred the matter to the Compliance and Amendments Committee for monitoring.
Okay, are the petitioner and respondent, do we have representatives from both here at this meeting?
Anonymous is here.
Okay, and do we have someone from DPH?
Allison Hawks is here.
Okay, thank you both for being here today. Since this is about compliance, I'd like to, actually, I see Chair Wolf, you have your hand up. Do you have a question before we get started?
Yeah, before we begin, I don't see in the record the order of determination. Is it?
I don't think I saw it in the record either, because I just reviewed it this afternoon.
Okay, just want to make sure that the. Okay, that's fine. I mean, we can continue, and I'll while I'm listening, I'll check to see if it went out or not. Thanks. Sorry,
I was on mute. Thank you for looking for that. Because this is about compliance, we're not going to set a timer on this, but I'd like to hear a brief update from Anonymous on what you have received so far in response to what the task force found for its order of determination on April 6th. Could you give us an update, please?
Sure, I can do that. And if I don't know if you call this the order of determination or if you guys have changed your procedure, but if you look at P648, that is the email that we got from Ms. Leger, both the respondent and myself, and that's what we received. So
my apologies for interrupting, Chair Wolf. I believe there was a indication of a slight process change for how we handle order determinations. We were instructed to provide orders, or not orders, but copies of the action of the task force to both parties the day after the decision is made, so that they can start working on our request immediately. In terms of when the order is going to be actually issued after that, that is an ongoing discussion, but an official order determination hasn't been issued, as this was just a meeting last month or at the beginning of the month. But they were provided a letter telling them what we would like them to do.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's what I was looking for, was either that letter or the OD, and because usually it would be placed at the top of the record packet. So, but okay. Thank you for pointing out where it is. Okay, thank you. Continue.
May I continue?
Yes, please proceed.
Okay. So you told them to do three things. They have to produce the records in a rolling basis. They have to key the redactions by footnote or other clear reference. And the things you guys called out were the email addresses, the email attachments, the text, and the chats. So the simplest thing first, the email attachments, they claim they have produced them. They may not, but they have not. They produced some of them. What happens is anytime where in any PDF they make even one redaction, it destroys all of the dozens or hundreds of other attachments in the document. And they have not fixed that. So they need to fix that so they can actually produce the email attachments. So they think they're producing them, but what they're seeing is the pre-redaction flattening of the PDF. So when you apply a redaction on Acrobat, and then you apply redactions, it destroys, unless you set the settings correctly, all of the embedded files, all the email addresses, etc. So they need to fix that for the email addresses and email attachment side. For just the other records on a rolling basis, they have reopened the request and started producing some things. So I mean that's going to take some time. I'm not expecting them to have finished it by today. But the important thing is the text and chat. So they have now confirmed to you that they did not preserve at the time of my request the texts of the public health officer of the city of San Francisco. That is Thomas Aragon. He was the health officer at the time of my request. He's the one whose emails were a lot of the emails that they produced. They had told me before in a different request, and now they've formally confirmed it here as well. They did not preserve the responsive text or search or do anything with his text at that time. As you may know, Aragon left city employment many months after my request, and they don't have any of those records anymore. And so I'm asking you to do the same exact thing you did with the police department. I have argued, and some on the task force have argued, that the 6729-7 means more than what the city attorney's office says, but even the city attorney's office says in the Good Government Guide that you have preserved records when they're requested. In this case, Grant Colfax, as the department had failed to do his duty to preserve records in a professional and business-like manner, which, according to the Good Government Guide, apparently only means preserving them when you request them, which I did. And I would ask you to, I think Member Schmidt brought this up at the full task force when it first came there. You have the authority under 67.30C to refer the matter to an enforcement body when you determine that any person has violated the Sunshine Ordinance. And I believe you should do the same as with SFPD, refer this back to the full task force, so the full task force can consider whether or not to refer Grant Colfax to the Ethics Commission and/or District Attorney. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Ms. Hawks, I'd like to hear from you about what DPH has been able to provide. And if you could respond about the issue with the attachments or email addresses being compromised when there are redactions made to the PDF.
Yeah, I mean, on the topic of attachments, my understanding is that the attachment file names are all active links that can be clicked open to open the files, like to a new PDF tab or a window. And so I believe that those attachments have been provided. So if there are attachments that you are finding that are not provided, we can go back and look for those. But we have provided attachments as PDF files from those records.
Sorry, I was on mute. Okay, so you believe that you've provided them, but Anonymous is saying that there's an issue there. But it sounds like you're willing to produce them if Anonymous is having problems and can identify specific files. Actually, I'm going to ask Chair Wolf, is this something that you're familiar with? Is there any technical support that we can provide to avoid this happening?
With regards to redactions?
No, with regards to this question of when redactions are made, there seems to be some, or Member Wong, I see you here too. When redactions are made to the PDF, that it somehow is messing with the attachment links. And the
I think, yeah, so I think Anonymous had mentioned that somehow it gets flattened, and that's a specific technical term. Let me just ask Anonymous a question. Are you looking for the metadata in the PDF? Is that what's being lost?
Nah. No, this is not a metadata related complaint. So what is happening is if they redact in the PDF of, let's say they give me 100 emails at once, they put them all into one PDF. And if there's even one redaction of anything in those 100 emails, when they apply redactions, it destroys all the hyperlinks, email addresses, and the attachments, because the attachments are embedded links, and that's what's happening.
Oh, okay.
So all of the attachments go away, even if there's like one redaction anywhere in a big batch of emails.
Okay, so are you saying that the links become not active, or is it deleting the actual link itself?
Both of them. So basically the link, you can no longer click on it, but because they embedded the attachments as PDFs, as they just told you, once the link is gone, the attached embedded file is also gone. There's no way for me to get at that file.
The attached embedded file. So is it a link to a different section of the PDF? It's like an anchor link?
Yeah, so basically these PDFs are not like plain PDFs. They're interactive PDFs that they're using, and that's their choice. That's fine. I can deal with that. But because of that, the attachments are embedded like sub-files inside the PDF, and the only way to get at them is if the link next to the word attachment : is active. But whenever you redact anything, if you don't set the settings correctly, it flattens the PDF file, destroying all of the embedded attachments, destroying all the links and the email addresses as well. So.
And you're aware there is a setting to prevent that from happening?
I'm aware that you can change it because I have gotten other departments to change it, yes.
Okay. And question for the respondent, do you have somebody on your IT team that can help you with this?
I mean, we can certainly look into it. Our intention is not to provide inactive links.
So if you're not providing an active link, then are you providing the document that the link is being directed to?
I mean, we can. I'm fairly certain we can provide that document. This is our system. My understanding is this was our system of providing records, but if that's not working, we can go back and look at that.
Okay.
I'm saying as there was no intention to obfuscate here.
No, I don't think, I'm not suggesting that. I'm just trying to understand if there's a what Anonymous is saying is that because the link is not active, there's no way to get access to the attachment that the link is referring to. And so that becomes an issue. And you may not be able to select the text either. So, these are permissions that are available to turn on or turn off in Adobe Acrobat, if that's the application that you're using to create the document.
Yes, I would have to look into that. I don't know about these settings in particular, so that would have to be investigated.
Okay. Let's put that on our list. Let's then move on to the rest of the report.
Yeah, so it seems based on what both parties have said here, so Anonymous is receiving records on a rolling basis. It does seem that there is an effort toward complying with our order. We need to get this technical issue fixed, and it sounds like the department is willing to proceed with that. Members, what do we, and I'm just looking at my notes here based on what Anonymous said. Now, it does, actually, I'd like to ask Ms. Hawks, was Anonymous, what Anonymous said about not preserving the texts of the text messages from Public Health Officer Aragon, is that correct, that those were not preserved and those are not available to be retrieved?
I mean, we did a thorough search and we do not have these texts. And I think just in terms of context, I mean, this is, when Dr. Aragon, he'd been over, he left EPH during, the height of the pandemic, and we were very focused, as I understood, I was not here back then. We're focused on addressing the pandemic, and so those texts were not preserved. I don't know what may or may not have been in there responsive to these records. There may not be anything. I'm not entirely sure, but we don't have records of his text.
Okay, so members, it sounds as though the department is trying to provide records on a rolling basis. We need to get the technical issue resolved. The text messages that were not preserved are not recoverable. And then there's the separate question about what Anonymous brought up, that Member Schmidt had brought up at the last hearing, which I did not attend, but I did listen to all of the audio for this section. Given everything that we have to consider today, what do you propose that we do at this hearing?
I have a question.
Yes.
Member Wolf. Question for Anonymous. Do you have any reason to believe that the text messages would exist? And if so, how?
Because I originally found out that they had not preserved these in a different records request, where they showed me that they had only other people's copies of Aragon's text. So we know that he was creating these records and they existed, at least at the even after the time of this request.
Okay. But by the same token, under Smith versus San Jose, it would be at his discretion to recover or find those texts, not necessarily the department.
Yes, the problem is, and he's gone. He's not a city employee. I can't do anything about him at this point. The problem is not that they misidentified which were public records because those are on his personal property. The problem is that they did not do the search and preservation at the time of the request, not like which ones he may at his discretion choose, he claims is personal or non-public.
Okay, so at the time of the request, which was in 2020, and Mr. Aragon was still March 2020. So no, that wasn't when the request was made, right? That was when
the request was made February 28th, I believe, and the complaint was sometime in March 2020.
Okay, so the you're saying that at that time, Dr. Aragon was still employed with the city?
Correct. Dr. Aragon was employed by the city and was the head of the COVID response. The reason I know that these texts about COVID exist is because in a different request, they gave me Dr. Colfax, who's the department head, his view of some of those texts, because they said, well, we didn't keep Dr. Aragon, so here's some portion of them from Dr. Colfax.
Okay, great. So, Ms. Hawks, are you aware, were you present or part of the discovery process for collecting these items?
You mean at what point in time? From Dr. Colfax?
From Dr. Aragon.
No. I'm just learning about this now as I take this on.
Oh, okay. Who was the person assigned to collect all the information for this request at the time?
This was, what is it, like, we've gone through several, I think I've mentioned this before, we've gone through several individuals who've held this position.
Okay.
So I have to look back and match that up. Okay. So I can't, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question.
Okay, that's fine. Anonymous, if this specific set of records is not available, what are you suggesting? Are you making a suggestion?
Yes, I'm making a suggestion that the task force do what it has done in two other cases. When I know you guys don't enforce 6729-7A through other types of retention, but the one part of retention is that when one makes a request, the agency is required to preserve the records at the time of the request. And so that's why I would suggest it going back to the full task force to consider whether or not you should, under 67.30C, make a referral for the failure to preserve the records at the time of the request. That's my suggestion. Thank you.
Okay, I have no further questions on this subject.
Member Wong, do you have any questions for the petitioner or the respondent? Okay, what do we propose? What shall we propose at this point? I think we do need to get the technical issue resolved. And we'd like to see the continued production of responsive records on a rolling basis as has been initiated. Is there anything else that you would like to see happen in terms of compliance? Okay. Since would one of you like to make a motion, or would you like me to restate that as a motion?
If you can restate it, please.
Okay. I'd like to make a motion that we ask the Department of Public Health to seek technical support to resolve the problem with links to attachments becoming deactivated when items are redacted within the PDF. It sounds like there is a solution, and we just need some technical support for it. So in this motion, I'd like to make a motion for the Department of Public Health to seek technical support to resolve the issue with broken attachment and email links in the documents, responsive records being provided in response to this request, and that documents continue to be produced on a rolling basis.
Thank you. You broke up a little bit towards the middle of that, but you are requesting that DPH seek technical support to resolve the issue with links, and that's where I kind of lost you.
With the technical issue regarding broken links to attachments and email addresses in the responsive records being provided.
Thank you. I do have that. That motion was made by Chair LaHood. Is there a second?
I'll second. Member Wolf.
We have a motion and a second. Would you like to open this up to public comment at this time?
Yes, please.
Are there any members of the public who wish to provide? Oh, before I do that, Ms. Hawks, can you provide your first and last name again? I didn't catch that.
It's Allison, Alison, and then Hawks is Hawkes.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'd like to open this up to public comment. If you'd like to provide public comment, can you please indicate it, and we will get moving on it. Anybody for public comment?
This is Patrick. I'd like to comment, please.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, I'll make a call for it again later. Mr. Manette-Shaw, you can go ahead and proceed.
Okay, I'm speaking in support of the motion on the floor, but related to that, it was interesting hearing Clerk Young indicate that the new interim policy is the day following a hearing, there will be a letter sent to the department in lieu of having to wait for an order of determination be issued. I'm wondering whether that next day letter it will be also sent to the complainant in addition to the department. And then separate from that minor question, I would just like to note for the task force's awareness, I recently had requested an email from Supervisor South IA's office that he had received. I wanted it in native format rather than a PDF file that was not copy and pastable from. And I was told they had to redact the metadata from the native email file because it might reveal sensitive data about the sending location. And they gave me the name of the package that the Board of Supervisors and potentially other city departments are using to scrub metadata out of native files. I will forward the name of that package to Chair Wolf, but I think all potential complainants should be aware that at least the Board of Soups, if not other city departments, are actually scrubbing metadata from native files. Thank you.
Sorry. Are there any other members of the public who wish to provide public comment? Hearing none, I believe that is our last public commenter. Can we close public comment on this matter?
Yes.
Thank you. On that motion, and I would also just like to include that we can continue the matter at the call of the chair after the recommendation. On that motion, Chair LaHood.
Aye.
LaHood, aye. Member Wolf.
Aye.
Wolf, aye. Member Wong.
Aye.
Wong, aye. The motion passes without objection.
Okay, before we move on to the next item, I just wanted to discuss with members regarding the other requests about the issue of the data not having been preserved, and that being the responsibility of Dr. Colfax. Chair Wolf, do you want us to continue monitoring this before considering something like that with the full task force, or do you have any interest in that? Do you want us to discuss that further at this time, or no?
I'm a little concerned that so much time has passed and there've been so much turnover that I don't know that it's worthwhile at this time to be able to go chasing down those text messages, considering it would be on a personal device that's no longer in the employ of the person. The person's no longer in the employ of the city. I think with regards to that, the complainant had suggested, I think it was 6727C.
6730C.
Oh, 6730C.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. So,
we don't have to have any further discussion on this. Since you were here, I thought I would bring it up.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, we could definitely make a notice. I don't know whether it was. I don't know which part of C. I don't recall which part of C. C is pretty jam-packed full of actionable items.
This is about not preserving records when the request was initially made.
Yeah, but 6730C is regarding with the authority that the task force has to do certain things. The question is what is it that we were being asked? What are we being asked to do inside of 6730C? I mean, 6730C is report to the Board of Supervisors,
Right.
Develop appropriate goals.
I think this was, if I recall, as it was stated, that this was referring it to one of the places we could refer it to, whether the Board of Supervisors or ethics or things like that. But perhaps in this situation, that's not the best course of action.
Well, the question is it was based upon, I believe, 6727 justification of withholding issue, that at the time that there was a failure upon either the respondent who it was specifically asking for that information from to actually preserve those records. And I think so I'm not quite sure who at this point we would report it. Who would we be reporting at this point? Is it the person who is the actual custodian, who no longer works for the city, or is it the person who is collecting the information, for the in response to the request,
Who is also no longer
who is
with the
also no longer with the city. So the question then becomes is who do you put the onus on here at that point? And that this is now coming now, despite, considering our backlog, that's taken almost, 2 years to get this to a hearing. I don't know what much else to do in that respect in order to satisfy the collection of that data at this point.
May I clarify something?
Sure.
I just want to make sure you're looking at the right section. I'm not suggesting 6727. It's 67.29-7. That's all I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Oh, my apologies. I think it says 6727. And was it just A that you were concerned about?
Correct. It's 6729-7A as interpreted in the Good Government Guide. Thank you.
And you were suggesting that we use 6730C to report who?
Yes. So sorry, to be clear, the chain of logic I'm using is the Good Government Guide says you have to preserve. This is the level of preservation you need. When someone requests it, you have to preserve the responsive records. 6729-7A says that is the responsibility of the department head. And per the conversation that happened in the full task force, what I'm asking is 67.30C is how you make the referral of the department head for the failure to preserve records at the time of the request to whoever you decide to make the referral to.
Okay. Just lost my screen.
This is Member Wong. I actually have a question about the full task force meeting where this case was heard. I'm curious if section 6729-7 and then also 6730C were brought up during the full task force hearing and discussed.
This is at the April meeting. I don't think so. I think what's being asked
over determination.
I think what's being asked for here is that the order was to produce documents. Documents were not produced because there's been such a high turnover in staff, and that but at the time of the request, the suggestion is that these records should have been preserved or retained at that time, so that they will survive all the turnover. And I think that's the thrust of the situation here, that this shouldn't happen because those records should have been collected at that time when those people were still in the employ of the city, and they should have been preserved somewhere with regards to the complaint. For the request. So the question then becomes,
I guess, I understand all of that. I was just curious if this had come up in the full task force hearing already, and if it had been deliberated over.
I don't recall.
Only because even though I wasn't there, I recently listened to the audio. Member Schmidt brought it up after the motion was made and the order of determination was issued, and he brought it up as sort of a possibility, but then did not make a motion on that.
Okay.
Got it. Thank you. That's helpful context. Yeah,
And
I guess.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's tough because then I don't know if that technically is considered, or if it was part of the deliberation since it was after the motion was made.
Well, I think one of the problems with so Grant Colfax is still the department head. Okay. So just so you know, I mean, what the complaint is suggesting is to bring an action against the current department head, who is also the department head at that time, for not assuring preservation of these records as per Administrative Code Section 67.29-7A, and is suggesting that because those records were not preserved, that the committee make a recommendation to the task force to invoke 67.30C to make a referral to a municipal office with enforcement power for a violation.
Chair Wolf, it seems as though that should have been considered at the first hearing, and it seems by even though I know I said, well, let's discuss this because this point was brought up, but it seems as though that should have been discussed at the primary hearing, and us bringing it up again, not in so much in relation to compliance, but something that was already decided. I don't know that we're actually bringing anything new to the discussion that wouldn't already have been discussed.
Okay, I hear you. I'm not making any decisions or judgments on that.
No, right.
I just hear you on that. The question is really appropriateness. Should have the task force considered this more deeply at the time, and if not, then it's being brought up now under level for monitoring, because those records are not available now. If we're talking about if that issue was already discussed and not taken up by the task force at the time, then I might agree with you that it can't be necessarily rehashed again here, or it shouldn't be. That we're here to monitor for records subsequent to the order to determination, to be produced. And if that was, not considered as part of the list of items to be produced, then I think that we should not take it up.
Can I?
I don't recall it. So.
Can I tell you what I asked that time?
Sure, if you could state it briefly.
Yeah, I specifically did not ask you to look for this violation because until you have ordered, it's in the rebuttal of my talk. I did not ask you because you hadn't ordered them to do anything. I can't. They hadn't. Nobody has asked them whether they have the records or not until you order them to produce them. They haven't told you whether they have the records to produce. So I specifically asked that you find out once you have ordered them to produce it, and then consider this after the fact. The 6729-7 is different from the 67.30C that Member Schmidt was discussing after the main motion was made.
Thank you for the
clarification. Go back to the rebuttal to listen to that.
let me just ask another question for Anonymous. I mean, weren't these text messages at issue at the time of the hearing?
Correct. And your order of determination orders that they produce the text messages. But at the time, I did not know that they hadn't preserved these ones because they had only admitted that they hadn't at that point in a different complaint. Only a few days ago did they send you this written statement saying that they did not preserve these text messages. That was very recently.
And did you provide us with any evidence for today's hearing that these text messages may or did exist?
I don't know when their response is. They sent it, let me show you.
But yeah, you said something about having received some information that Grant Colfax had made some comments about these text messages.
No. So what I've received, to explain how, you asked me how do I know or believe that these exist? So my answer to that was in a different request, I made a request separately after this request for Aragon's text messages. And they, in that request, which has a separate complaint, also failed to preserve them, but they told me that right at the time. They told me that they failed to preserve them, and I have a separate complaint for those separate text messages. And what they told me they would do is they apologize. They say, Aragon has now quit, and we did not preserve them at the time you made the request. So instead, we will give you a portion of them by searching through Dr. Colfax's text messages where Aragon was a party, right? And so those are the ones that they have produced going back through even this time period. And that is the evidence that text messages from Aragon would exist if they had preserved them.
Yeah, but did you provide that evidence to us for this hearing here today?
No, the text messages of Colfax are not in this packet, no.
Yeah, so we're to take this on your hearsay?
I'm sorry?
We're to take we're to take that you believe that the text messages had existed on your hearsay or your verbal confirmation?
I think they have said it in writing to you that they did not preserve them. I would say that would be enough, that in their email to this task force on, let's see what day it is. It is page 637.
637.
I don't think it's me saying they didn't preserve them. I think it's them saying that.
It's a big file to wait for the web browser to catch up. The only reason why I say that is because unless, if you show something in hard copy that, that there's some evidence that they exist from a first party, it makes the case a little easier.
To be clear, they did not respond on whether or not they had preserved them until Thursday. So it's not like I didn't have a chance yet after that to give something for this packet. You have continued the matter. I'm happy to provide that evidence for whenever this comes back before the task force or before the committee, since you have made a continuation motion.
Got it. All right. While I'm waiting for that, what are some of the other? What's the last issue here?
I think that's it. I mean, the only other thing that I think would be helpful in the motion, we we didn't include a specific time element by which this needed to be completed, but documents are being provided on a rolling basis. This is something that we are monitoring. I would just ask Ms. Hawks and the department, and I don't know if we need to include this in a motion or not, but if you could let us know when you've figured out the technical issue, I think that would be helpful in keeping things moving along.
We can of course do that. Should we just reach out to you?
Yeah, if you could email the task force administrator and let us know when you've figured out that technical issue, that would be very helpful.
Okay.
Members, I just being mindful of the time here and knowing that this is an issue that we're going to keep monitoring. Is there anything else that you think we need to discuss today, or should we move on to the next item?
Since my web browser is now almost frozen, trying to scroll, I can't.
I could read you the text of that email. It's just 2 paragraphs.
Go ahead.
It says, so this was, okay, it's slightly more than 2 paragraphs, but received on April 21st. Dear Sunshine Ordinance Task Force, DPH joined the full task force meeting on April 6th to discuss file number 20059. DPH has previously provided the requester thousands of pages of responsive records and will continue to share responsive documents on a rolling basis. This includes emails with attachments. Any email PDFs that include attachments are indicated with an attachments line item at the top of the email. The attachment file names are all active links that can be clicked on to open files in a new PDF tab or window. An example is pictured below. And then it says, regarding Dr. Aragon's texts, the custodians of records who managed this request left the department in September and December of 2021, respectively. When our current team began to work on responding to public records, Dr. Aragon had been gone from the department for over a year. Dr. Aragon left DPH during the height of a global pandemic, and all city efforts at the time were focused on addressing the task of saving lives. We have conducted a thorough search and do not have Dr. Aragon's texts. We apologize for not preserving these records when the request was made. DPH looks forward to resolution guidance on this matter from the Sunshine Task Force. Finally, we would like to clarify early conversations that the requester had with DPH in March 2020 regarding whether requester would narrow his request. In the initial exchange between the requester and the then custodian of records, 25,000 was the estimated number for all documents, including duplications, not a final count to be used as a measure of documents to be produced. We will continue searching and providing responsive documents on a rolling basis.
Sorry about that. Okay. Okay.
So if we are, oh, my apologies.
Yeah, I'm not, I don't know, I want to think this through a little bit more.
Okay.
On this, I understand what the complainant is asking for. I'm not quite ready to move it forward. Maybe I'll bring something up at the task force meeting. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay. I'd like to thank Anonymous and Ms. Hawks. I believe we are finished with this for now. So thank you for being here. And Mr. Young, if you could please call the next item.
Yes, item 5 is file number 21054, complaint filed by Patrick Minette Shaw against Grant Colfax, Veronica Vane, and the Department of Public Health for violating admin code section 67.21 by failing to respond to a public records request in a timely and or complete manner. I believe I'm just reading through the summary of previous actions. On the 22nd of February, the Compliance Amendments Committee moved to ask DPH to work with EPIC's team to see how much can be done in an automatic fashion, and asked Mr. Raffin to get a number count of San Francisco residents discharged out of county from SF General Hospital and Laguna Honda Hospital as a separate number for the time period identified in the initial request, January 1st, 2020, and June 30th, 2022, and respond within 10 business days or report back the estimated amount of time the department thinks it will take to complete that request. The committee would like to recommend that the department consider an analysis of time period January 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2020, and recommend that they consider how long it will take to provide the information from July 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2020, and January 1st, 2021 through April 30th, 2021.
Thank you. I just want to verify, do we have the petitioner and respondent or representatives here for this item?
I'm Patrick. I'm still here, yes.
Okay, and who do we have representing? Ms. Hawks, are you staying with us, or is Mr. Raffin here?
I will be on for a little bit, and then I'll have to hop over to another activity, but I do have several people from DPH who can support.
Okay, great. Mr. Minette Shaw, why don't we hear from you first about what you have received since our last meeting?
Okay, so on March 4th, I received the letter that Mr. Raffin sent to the task force. I note he did not provide you with the specific time estimates on March 4th that you had requested. Subsequently, I think Ms. Hawks or someone at DPH's public records staff notified you that there had been something like 200 hours and $18,000 worth of time invested in whatever methodology Mr. Raffin had engaged in, and methodologies that the EPIC technical team may have assisted Mr. Raffin with. If you've had a chance to read the fourth supplemental document I submitted to you that's dated April 21st, my written document noted that Mr. Raffin had claimed his team had found just one record of a potential out-of-county discharge from SFGH and 0 discharges from Laguna Honda. The table I inserted in my supplemental document shows on page 1 that previously DPH's public records staff had informed me that there had been a total of 10 discharges, not 0, from Laguna Honda across those 3 time periods, even if Mr. Raffin, with EPIC's assistance, did not locate those records electronically in EPIC. As well, my written testimony for today showed that in the past 13 and a half fiscal years, SFGH has discharged an average of 56 patients out of county each year, and Laguna Honda has discharged 23 patients out of county on average, for a combined total of 79 patients discharged out of county annually. So it's sad that EPIC is unable to locate any of those discharges. As for the rest of Mr. Raffin's March 4th response, there is no discussion whatsoever of what methodologies DPH and EPIC's technical staff may have used within EPIC for their search. The 5 bullet points in item 4 on page 2 of my supplemental raised the question of whether the methodologies had included searching in and locating any final discharge notes screen in EPIC's patient flow module, whether DPH and EPIC had reviewed the billing module for dates of when patients had been discharged and linked that up to their audit program within Epic, and whether DPH and Epic had even looked for patient discharge instructions that contain their list of current medications for each patient and the instructions about where patients were being discharged to. Rappin and Epic did not address whether the search methodology had been restricted only to the single free-form text field that Mr. Rappin had claimed is the only place in Epic that they do potentially capture discharge data. And whether they had even attempted to search for the final discharge notes in structured fields that Epic asserts are in that database. And while that may not now be mandatory data entry fields, and instead may be optional fields that DPH staff could choose to ignore data entry, whether they had searched those fields anyway to see if some DPH staff had in fact exercised their option to enter data in those fields, and whether any records had been found, regardless of whether it was the majority of all discharge notes or whether some optional data entry had been done on a minor level. Page 3 of my supplemental document described that in the 29 email chain among DPH staff, they had admitted there had been 2 other requests that had been made for zip code data at the time of discharge, including one such zip code at time of discharge requests from an internal DPH subdepartment, and how those 2 requests had been resolved or answered, if at all, and whether those records could be provided to me. Finally, on paragraph 7 on the last page of my supplemental, I was told by Supervisor Safae's staff that the DPH is now manually complying out-of-county discharge data from potentially 2020 and 2021 in order to produce records. The Board of Supervisors will be presented next October as a result of the ordinance being discussed and voted on during today's full Board of Supervisors meeting, mandating that all hospitals report the out-of-county discharges. I had the impression from Supervisor Safae's staff that apparently DPH is considering whether to make those discharge note fields mandatory so that in the future they don't have to compile the data manually. At a bare minimum, I think your committee should order DPH today to provide me with that manual data they are now collecting on a roll for the Board of Supervisors on a rolling basis as it is collected and compiled, and not wait until October to provide it to me. That's pretty much all I want to say today, other than I'm still appalled that DPH continues to evade answering whether EPIC does in fact have data entry screens like the sample that I had in today's letter, and I've previously provided the same sample to the Sunshine Task Force. RAPN and DPH and the public records staff at DPH have all studiously avoided denying that those fields even exist. And I think that those records must exist in that database. They just haven't looked in the right place, even if they spent 200 hours claiming that they did so. Thank you.
Mr. Minette-Shaw, thank you. I did read your fourth, I read the document you provided. Thank you for the summary. Actually, I'm going to jump in with some questions, and then members, if you have other questions. Ms. Hawks, are you still with us?
Sorry, no, I'm turning you over to Eric Raffin.
Thank you. Mr. Raffin.
Good evening.
Hi. Mr. Raffin, I would give you a moment to respond. I do have some specific questions for you. Did you want to respond in general, or should I ask specific questions?
I probably have a 1 to 2 minute response, if that's okay, and then I'm pleased
sure.
to take your questions.
Great.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. So good evening again, committee members. I've reviewed the material from the fourth supplemental information document filed by the petitioner, Mr. Minette-Shaw, on April 21st, 2022. When DPH implemented the EPIC Comprehensive Health Record System, the way discharge information is captured in that system changed from the way it was captured in legacy systems, from which all of the current responses, except the most recent response that we delivered in the last month or so, all of the prior responses were from legacy systems that collected the discharge information in a different way. Prior to EPIC, all of those prior Public Records Act requests for discharge information were fulfilled by using a manual process that involved a chart abstraction of discharge notes from patient charts, and then a manual review of those notes by a clinical staff member to identify responsive records. Those information systems that were used to deliver the responsive data have been fully decommissioned. EPIC is set up differently than the decommissioned systems. It's a much more modern enterprise-wide health record system. It was selected because it offers a better fit for our patients to access their own health information, as well as for our providers across our health network. An unintended consequence of the transition to EPIC is that the process to identify out-of-county discharges is more challenging than the older systems. We have committed approximately 200 hours of time to identifying responsive records to the petitioner's requests over the 3 time periods that were just referenced. We did search all discrete fields in the discharge workflow, including the 1 additional field that we had identified that I noted in my response to your committee. And we identified 1 responsive record, several other records that were not responsive, and other records where insufficient data was available to make a determination of responsiveness. We followed your committee's advice, we sought external assistance, and have exhausted the means by which we can identify responsive records. And I'm pleased to take follow-up questions.
Thank you. So reading Mr. Minette-Shaw's fourth supplemental information, the thing that jumped out to me the most, that was the most interesting, was actually point number 7 about the Supervisor Safai's proposed legislation is this something that we don't know if this will pass, or it is not certain yet, but based on what Mr. Minette Shaw says, it sounds like that there's work in progress being done to gather this information from your databases. Can you respond to that? Is that true? Are you aware of work that's being done on that front?
I am not aware that we are conducting any such work.
Okay, so you're not aware of that, Mr. Minette Shaw. If you could, you're telling us that Mr. Barnes told you that work was underway, or was it that he was hopeful that this work was going to be done?
Well, it was on a phone call with Mr. Barnes and another community healthcare advocate. And so I don't have a verbatim transcript of our phone call, and it was not on Zoom. But my recollection is that Mr. Barnes may have specifically mentioned Sneha Patil, who's the deputy director at DPH, who surely Mr. Raffin must know Ms. Patil. And I think Mr. Barnes indicated that he was aware that the DPH response has been that Epic does not track this data, and so they were compiling it manually. And it was my understanding from his Mr. Barnes's phrasing that manual compilation of out-of-county discharges was ongoing and underway. So I'm kind of shocked that Mr. Raffin is totally unaware of this. I notice, and I am not trying to be snarky here, but from what Mr. Raffin just said, it sounds like he is still skating around the issue of whether that discharge note screen on page 2 of my letter to for today's hearing that I provided to you and have provided to the Board of Supervisors over development of this legislation requiring every hospital in the city to report this data, that screen exists in Epic's patient flow module. And while Epic's media relations department would not answer a follow-up inquiry I placed about whether that screen and the fields, the structured database fields on that screen are configurable during installation and configuration of Epic at any of Epic's client locations, can be made an optional field that is not a mandatory data entry field upon discharge. Mr. Raffin has still not indicated whether that screen exists, whether the information I have been given from other clinicians who have used Epic at other locations in San Francisco exists in the DPH configuration of Epic.
Okay, Mr. Minette Shaw, I'm gonna have you pause there. Thank you for the update. I see that Chair Wolf has a question. Chair Wolf, I'm not sure who. Let me just hand things over to you to ask your questions.
Okay, so So questions for Mr. Raffin. And I'm sorry, is your title, are you a doctor or not?
No, I'm the DPH Chief Information Officer.
Okay, great. Just want to respect your title. Okay, so the first question I have is for the out-of-county data, that was existed prior to Epic, correct?
It was easier to obtain from the two now decommissioned systems. So it was easier to conduct a search, pull the discharge notes out, but it was still a manual review process.
Okay,
but somebody has to actually read the discharge notes and determine if there's responsive information in the discharge notes.
Right, in those two previous platforms, there wasn't regular report or analysis that was done that the city required?
I don't know if there was or was not any sort of regular reporting. I arrived in DPH about 3 weeks before we went live on the new platform, the Epic platform.
Okay, great. And so with the new platform, was there a requirement to track or maintain this data?
Good question. So what's required when an inpatient hospitalization where the patient is being prepared for discharge is the creation of a discharge note, which is typed in by typically a discharge coordinator. It might be a social worker, it might be a nurse. It is also accompanied by a screen that does have both structured and unstructured data elements in it. The screen that the petitioner has provided is not the actual screen that you see in Epic, but there is a screen that has fields. The primary issue that we face in providing responsive records in a straightforward way is that the fields are not mandatory. They do not produce a hard stop if they are not completed. And that's primarily because there is no regulatory requirement to capture the information such as what the petitioner is looking for, which is presumably a name and a street address of the discharge to facility. So the fields in the discharge workflow are infrequently completed, and there's no requirement, and there's not a way to force any discharge coordinator to complete that information in place today. Decisions were made at the time that Epic was implemented, and this is one of the areas where the discharge note is what the requirement is, and so that discharge note is completed, but these other fields are very infrequently completed, and that would make it easier to provide responsive information. But to clarify, in the time since I was last before your committee, we identified one additional field on that screen. It is not a structured field. However, we added it to our search criteria, which absolutely included variables or stratifications such as a street address or a city, so obviously including a city name and a zip code, which would have been very helpful in determining responsive records. And with the addition to our broad search of that one additional field is where we were able to identify the records, including the one responsive record that we have reported. And that is what we are able to report out of the Epic system.
So out of hundreds, if not thousands, of patients that get discharged out of the San Francisco Department of Health system, you can only find one?
No, we can report on precisely how many discharges occur on a daily basis. That's not the issue. The issue is the responsive records for these requests pertain specifically to being able to identify the discharge to another healthcare facility that is outside the city and county of San Francisco, which requires a lot more specific information to be documented, such as the street address of that discharge to healthcare facility, so that we can make a determination if that facility is within the city and county of San Francisco or not.
Let me ask you a different question. Is there a requirement to provide or to maintain a chain of custody for patients in the responsibility of Department of Public Health?
Are you asking while patients are inpatients?
Yes.
Admitted to the hospital?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. There's a consent to treatment sign, conditions of admission, and then as an inpatient, the patients are in our care, and the discharge note and the eventual discharge of the patient is where the transition happens. Either the patient is discharged to home or discharged to some other facility.
Right. So then the question is if they're discharged to some other facility, is that being tracked? Is that being entered into the system? Either prior to Epic as part of protocol, or during now with Epic as part of protocol?
So understood. So that is what is typically recorded is a general discharge category, and even that is not required for regulatory purposes. It is more frequently completed than not, but those high-level discharge categories in Epic, there are fewer categories, so it's not as easy to discern. It doesn't, for instance, have a differentiator between discharged to a facility within the city and county of San Francisco and discharged to a facility outside the city and county of San Francisco. There's just a category that it says discharged to another healthcare facility, period. And that's the categorization, such as discharged to home, or if the patient unfortunately expired, there's a category for that as well.
Okay, let me ask you a different question. Is there regulation or law that requires you to, well, let me ask it a different way. Is there regulation or law that speaks to when your responsibility ends?
So the responsibility ends when the patient is discharged from the hospital.
Physically, or by signature?
It's not a process that happens in the same moment in time, because the provider has to agree to the discharge, and that requires the preparation of that discharge note that I referenced a little while ago. And then obviously, as you've seen in many occasions, people are usually escorted with either loved ones or with perhaps a patient transportation crew that is then going to, and that's when the chain of custody would move between our hospital and, say, for instance, a patient transportation company who would then be transporting the patient to another healthcare facility.
Okay, very good. And do you notate that if a transportation company was required, is that part of any notation on a regular basis?
I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to ask a couple of folks to get me the answer. Okay,
that's fine. Thank you. All right, I have maybe a question for Mr. Munat-Shah then. So then at this point, what do you want us to do here? Because it doesn't seem like this information, as we've been discussing through your complaint here is by regulation available. So where shall we go from here? Yeah.
Actually, Chair Wolf, I want to hear Mr. Minette-Shaw's answer, but I would like to ask Mr. Raffin one other question, because he had been here before and we had asked him to do some additional searches. Mr. Raffin, I believe we had discussed previously that there were probably names of specific places outside of the city where you might be more likely to release people to based on past patterns of, based on past data and knowing where people might be likely to go to elsewhere in the Bay Area. Were you able to do any? Did you do any searches on specific facility names to see if those came up within your database?
I don't believe we did specific facility names because if there's even one letter out of sorts in the spelling, it would have returned a null value. We were able to identify out-of-county discharges, the one responsive record, and then several others that were within the city and county of San Francisco by looking for the address terms. Those tend to be much easier to discern, especially because the city and the zip code tend to be, it looks like at least, they tend to be spelled correctly more frequently.
Okay, thank you. Chair Wolf, if you'd like to continue with your question to Mr. Minette-Shaw.
Yeah, so Mr. Minette-Shaw, so listening to what Mr. Raffin had to say, that these fields were not required by regulation either before or now during the use of EPIC, where or what should we do here? What is your thought?
Well, I'm not sure, but I'm aware of the two systems that had previously been used. I think it's called Envision or Lifetime Clinical Record from Siemens Corporation, and the SF Get Care database developed by RTZ Associates. I'm aware that SF Get Care had been modeled on, or rapidly prototyped, I should say, from a database I developed with someone else at Laguna Honda Hospital. I know damn well. SF Get Care has the name of the city, the name of the facility that patients were discharged to. The city has spent something like $14 million to RTZ Associates to develop additional add-on modules to that database. The DPH public records staff stalled me and never provided an answer of whether SF Get Care had been fully decommissioned or whether it was still in use. I can put in records requests to the city controller's office and probably get a straighter answer than I'm getting out of DPH about whether, wait a minute, let me finish, about whether that database is still in use and not decommissioned. Mr. Raffin just stated that there are fields that may have more accurate data entry and fewer typos, including a field for the name of the city or a zip code. And the other portion of the EPIC database, which, by the way, 10 out of the 14 hospitals in San Francisco use EPIC, a related feature of EPIC is something called Care Everywhere, to allow patients' medical records, including their admission and discharges from acute care hospitals, to be shared with their primary care givers. and their primary care MDs, whether those private practices have a full version of Epic or not, they can exchange medical records between, say, I'm on Brown and Toland, and I know damn well my patient records have been shared between the various medical specialties I see that are transmitted back to my primary care doctor. And I think there is probably a regulatory requirement in the JCO, the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Hospitals, that require discharge notes to begin being prepared at the time a patient is admitted to a hospital.
That's right.
And I can't for the life of me understand how they can discontinue billing unless they know for certain the date of a patient's actual discharge. Those 29 emails exchanged among employees who work for Mr. Raffin had discussed being able to potentially match up a zip code.
Before you launch into a different issue, I want to just discuss two issues first that you brought up. Okay, one is, first of all, the data that was collected, according to Mr. Raffin's testimony, is that that it's not a structured field, which means that it's very subjective. People put in shorthand or some kind of notes. There could be typographical errors or spelling errors or what have you. So doing a search is not exquisite. It's a hunt and peck game. Second, go ahead.
And Mr. Rapin's assertion directly contradicts what Epic's Media Relations Department told me, that there are separate, distinct fields, one field for the city, one field for the zip code. I'm sure the zip code field is dimensioned or formatted to accept only numeric data, whereas the city field probably allows both alpha and numeric data in those fields. So what he's telling you about them not being structured fields directly contradicts what the Epic Media Relations Department told me.
Okay, but at the same token, it's not a required field either. So it could be skipped over, and the screen could be completed without entering any information in there.
Well, apparently, patients I know who have been hospitalized at UCSF and other hospitals in San Francisco using Epic, those facilities are populating data in those fields. And so whether DPH was so focused on caring only for COVID patients and not doing cross-training of its staff on how to use those structured fields that are there, it's just inexplicable to me.
Well, that's okay. But the point is whether it's by regulation, it's required for them to enter that information at all.
Well, the hearing today, the Joint Board of Soups Committee of the Whole and SFMTA, who are now into hour 9 of a meeting that started at 9 a.m. about closing JFK Drive, has prevented the full Board of Supervisors from even beginning their 2 p.m. meeting today, at which agenda item 16 is the ordinance that will create a regulatory requirement in San Francisco that every hospital track their out-of-county discharges.
Well, that's fine. That's fine, but that has to do with moving forward from today. Your complaint was based upon past data before.
And given what Bill Barnes has told me, apparently DPH is currently compiling those out-of-county discharge data manually all along, even if Epic or the Envision, LCR, and SF Get Care databases weren't have been decommissioned all along. Ever since I first began requesting this data, DPH could have been compiling this data manually. They could have. The question is were they required to? And if they were required to, then the records would, all records or some records would exist. At this point, we don't know, because those records back so far back in history. Having worked at Laguna Honda and logged hard copy medical charts from the medical records department at one end of the building back up to the rehab department at the other end of the building, I know medical records staff flag incomplete medical records, and it seems to me that to the extent discharge notes have to be documented in the medical record, that DPH has that information, whether it was a regulatory requirement or not, is moot. It's that information is in the medical charts, whether it's electronic records or whether it's paper records. But wait a minute, and as the task force has routinely, over the years, ordered various city departments to compile data manually, and you're forgetting that CIPRA requires data that is stored in electronic databases to be produced as a required record.
I am not disputing that. I mean, I know the law. I don't know what that. I'm not disputing it at all. I'm just trying to understand and where if the actual records exist or not. And according to Mr. Raffin, that these many of these records were, and when you're talking about being entered in to a database from hard copy, that a lot of it is very subjective and is very hard to search for. So the question then becomes, for the previous two platforms that you're talking about, whether they're active or not, or the data is available to be searched or not. The question is whether any records could be produced even if it was searched. That's a question. Okay, and you're specifically asking based upon what's in these databases. You were not asking for the hard copies of the discharge notes. So,
Chair
yes.
I believe part of the problem is that they've switched from the old databases to the new database. So Mr. Manette-Shaw used to be able to get this information. He's not getting it now because they're not gathering it the same way in Epic. Mr. Raffin, is that correct?
What Mr. Raffin has said is that the old databases also contained some sort of pointers to help them narrow review of manual paper records. And that 29 email exchange among Raffin's own employees that was provided to me as part of a public records request, his staff had discussed in those 29 emails that they might be able to narrow the data in whatever fields they have, and to help identify the discharges that were out of county. And Mr. Rappin has never addressed, as I raised in the document I submitted today, there have been 2 previous requests for similar zip code at the time of discharges from within somewhere within DPH, and yet they never indicated how they had tried to respond to those 2 other records requests for similar data, and whether they were able to narrow the scope and then use the audit logs in Epic to try to match up discharge dates with patient admission dates and produce pointers on narrowing how many paper records they would even have to look at. I'm aware that I'm aware that a lot of SFGH's patients come from out of county and they are sent back out of county. I get it. All I've been asking for is records on, and every year I put in records requests to DPH for this out of county data. I have always narrowed it to, I only want data on San Francisco residents who were living in the city at the time of admission. I don't care about all of the trauma patients that come into the SFGH trauma level 1 portion of the hospital. I just want San Francisco residents. That narrows it down quite a bit on admissions and discharges. And then the discharge piece, if they can track the zip code at the time of discharge, there's only, 29 zip codes in San Francisco? Or if, as Mr. Rappin said, there is a dedicated structured field for the name of the city where it's apparently harder to make typos in that city structured fields, they should be able to narrow down the name of the facilities patients are discharged to that do not have San Francisco as the name of the city or the zip code of the city a patient is discharged to.
So I get that. The point here is are you talking about in the Epic system, or are you talking about in the previous 2 platforms?
I'm talking about in the Epic system. That thread of 29 emails was discussing how DPH staff has been asked in the past to locate zip code at the time of discharge that is entered into Epic.
Okay, stop there. Mr. Raffin, can you respond to that last statement that Mr. Minetshaw stated?
So I do not know of the other requests, but what I can tell you is that the fields that are searchable in the discharge workflow are very infrequently valued, meaning they're blank. When we found the one additional field, found its location in the database, and included it in our search with our search criteria that I spoke to a little while ago, even though it is an unstructured field and is related to being able to send an electronic fax to the facility that will be receiving the patient when we discharge them from our hospital, we were able to parse and split out the typed responses in that one field. And that is what we were able to do to provide the one responsive record, as well as a number of other non-responsive records and other records that did not have sufficient information for us to determine where the discharge to facility was located. The
Okay,
only
stop.
place
Go
where,
ahead.
if you don't mind, I just want to clarify, the work in the past has always been manual, whether it was pulling up paper or pulling up electronic discharge notes, abstracting them, having a clinical staff person read them. It is going to be no different for any future work that goes on in Epic. The issue that we have is that it is much more difficult because there are less fields that help us narrow the number of discharge notes that need to be manually reviewed than with both of the two systems, the Envision system and the RTZ GetCare system that the petitioner mentioned a little while ago.
Okay,
so that's where things stand.
Mr. Raffin, let me just, I want to give you a little bit of a personal account. I recently moved a family member from a hospital into a skilled nursing facility into memory care. And there, for each one of those facilities, there was a discharge and intake form. Okay, and for the hospital, there's extensive notes taken by social worker for discharge, and they specifically asked for where are you going after here, because there is still some responsibility for the hospital. Could somebody please mute your phone number ending in 69, please?
That's me.
Yeah, it was a lot of noise. Okay.
There's not any noise here at all.
Well, okay, we're hearing a lot of noise from that phone number. I'm sorry. I'm just based upon my personal experience. This is in a different county, no less, and it's with a private hospital rather than a county hospital. But still, there was a considerable amount of information taken as to where my family member was going. And then upon discharge from the skilled nursing facility, there was equal number of detail taken on discharge, because according to them, they still have responsibility up until the time that they're received by the next place that they go. If they go home, then it's done. But so I'm just wondering, and I don't know the regulations for San Francisco County or the city with regards to that. But I'm just wondering if, those discharge records, are they not entered into some electronic system? And here it would be Epic.
So first off, I hope all of those transitions went smoothly for your family.
They did. Thank you.
Welcome. So the discharge note is likely the piece of clinical or medical record documentation you're referring to. And yes, so that social worker or nurse who is coordinating the discharge writes a note into a field that is not a searchable field. It's a big blob of text. And that note may contain enough specific information to determine if a discharge facility is inside or outside of San Francisco County, and it may not. But the thing to note is that it's not searchable. The other fields that are searchable are the ones that are infrequently filled in. So the only way to even determine if there's enough clear and detailed information is to review those discharge notes manually. And that is the process that had been used in the past with the systems that predated Epic. And if it turns out we will end up needing to do that as part of the legislation that was mentioned earlier, we would likely have to do exactly the same thing, where a clinical staff member would need to read the discharge notes and look for that information in the discharge note, and then note it. And then if it's not easy to determine at face value, somebody would then have to do the research to confirm whether the facility is in the city or not.
Thank you. I have no
You're
more.
welcome.
I have no more questions.
Member Wong, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions, no.
Mr. Raffin, I'm still intrigued by this proposed legislation, which it sounds like has been delayed by other things going on in City Hall. But based on what you're saying, if this goes through, then your department will have to go back and manually scour the data for this information, or are you confident in the response that in the time periods Mr. Manette Shaw has requested that there has been either one discharge out of city, or according to the other information provided to Mr. Manette Shaw, 10 discharges out of to facilities outside of the city? I guess could you speak to that, or if that legislation passes, will your department have to go back and redo all of this in a new fashion?
So for any discharges that occurred after August 3rd, 2019, it's certainly possible that we might have to go back and conduct the manual review that I described in more detail in testimony at the last hearing. But that is a possibility, yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Manette Shaw, I'm going to go back to Chair Wolf's question to you. What do you have a specific request or proposal at this point? I mean, we have gotten together and discussed this a couple of different times. We've asked Mr. Raffin and his department to do various searches. He says that they have done these searches and we've received the results that you have so far, which is either 1 or 10, and I don't know which responsive data you have more faith in. Do you want us to do something else at this time, or do you think that it will be important to see what happens with this proposed legislation, and perhaps that will produce different records with a different result? What are you thinking at this point?
I don't know what to think at this point, although it's not the 1 potential versus 10 discharges from Laguna Honda that the DPH Public Records Department produced, saying that they had found those 10 records in part through a manual search, because there are fewer discharges at Laguna Honda than there are at SFGH. It's not 1, it's not 10, it's an average of 79 discharges per year. So how suddenly did it drop off from 79 discharges out of county annually between the 2 hospitals to 0? That is simply inconceivable, that 13 years worth of average data has suddenly disappeared. Again, I'm very frustrated that this committee of the whole with MTA over the closure of that drive in Golden Gate Park has delayed even the start of today's 2 p.m. full Board of Supervisors meeting, at which agenda item 16 has a hyperlink to the background legislation that they are going to require every hospital in San Francisco to report this data to the Board of Soups. And Mr. Raffin is going to have to figure out whether they are going to activate those structured fields, including name of the city, name of the facility, and what type of care that facility provides, whether it's skilled nursing for Bruce Wolf's relatives, whether it's subacute care for patients like Ken Zhao, who wound up discharged out of county via discharge from Laguna Honda to a couple of intermediate facilities before being discharged for subacute level of care at Seton Hospital. They're going to have to end up tracking this stuff. They're going to have to end up making those database fields mandatory if they want to ease not having to review records manually. They're going to have to activate those fields as being mandatory data entry fields.
All right, let me ask you a quick question. Let me ask you a quick question. If that comes to pass, and Mr. Raffin and his team goes back and does the same research that he did for your request and comes up with the same answer, then what?
Then the Board of Supervisors are going to have to, I guess, ask DPH why they can't activate those fields and make them operational.
Well, but that's not in our purview here at the Sunshine Task Force. So I'm a little concerned as to why we're being asked here today to monitor this, because it doesn't seem like there's anything for us to continue to that there's a continued violation here at this point. You know, unless there's some other evidence or some other discovery that could show that there are records that exist. And I understand what you're saying, that how did it go from 70 some odd per year to now 0? Yeah, that's curious to me too. But, you know, I think that demands a different request at this point. I'm not sure how.
Okay, at the point I submitted the public records requests, I was aware that DPH had migrated from one electronic database to another at a cost of $164 million, right? And I assumed that if they had used the Envision and or SF GetCare as a tool to winnow or narrow the search of paper copy records or manual review eyeball up to computer screen as a manual review of electronic data, that because even a manual review of electronic data appears to be covered under CIPRA, that there would be some remedy that the Sunshine Task Force would say, okay, look, you can't just push a button and search for the name of the city, but you have used in the past some way of narrowing the scope of your searches, and you were able to come up with the out-of-county discharge data in the past. Why can't Epic do the same thing now? And I am just not buying it that having administered the Laguna Honda Rehabilitation Services database that was rapidly prototyped into SF GetCare, that a single free-form text field is not searchable. I don't buy it that you cannot search a free-form text field at all, and that it is so difficult to use advanced computer programming algorithms to locate in a free-form text field, where did the patient go?
Yeah,
what do we do?
That's the point. That's the point, Mr. Manette Shaw, is that it is subjectively written. If somebody writes in shorthand, or there's lots of typographical errors or character errors, or there's some sort of other kind of terminology, or it doesn't say at all. How do you know what to search for? You don't. Because
I don't know, but you know what? Here, Chair Wolf.
Not everybody uses the same style of writing. If it was a structured field that had a drop-down menu of all the different places that a person could go to in the Bay Area, plus or another choice that said, went home, okay, that would be a different story, because you can't do anything subjectively there. But in a free form, regular expression, open text field, it's impossible unless you read each and every single one. And that, I would say, would be pretty painstaking for the number of records that the city has to handle on a daily basis.
Okay, and what I'm saying is that when I worked at Laguna Honda, I was aware that the medical records department would flag inappropriate abbreviations in paper records, and that the staff, the medical staff, whether they were social workers or nurses or certified nursing assistants doing the data entry, that they all quickly caught on to standard medical abbreviations that were allowed versus ones that aren't. And I'm not buying it that there's a single field that you would throw all of a patient's discharge instructions, their medication history, their prescription, adverse reactions to, all in a great big mishmash of a free-form text field. I ain't buying it. And
Mr. Mineta, I'm going to have you pause for a second. Member Wong has a question.
It's not a question per se, more of a comment. I feel like at this point we're getting to a point where we're talking a bit in circles. We are focused on like one very specific detail, which unfortunately is outside of the purview of this committee and task force. I think from my perspective, we've done our due diligence on this side in attempting to attain these records from DPH. I don't know that there's any course of action for this committee to move forward, as far as I can tell. I don't know if my fellow committee members have thoughts on that.
The only other thing I want to ask, I know Mr. Raffin, we had talked about, I guess you have completed the search for all of the time periods that Mr. Minette Shaw has requested, or have you completed the search for all of the time periods Mr. Minette Shaw had requested?
Yes.
Okay. And just to verify, and I know we've talked about this a couple of different times, have you also tried doing searches by eliminating records that would be non-responsive because the people were released either to home or to facilities in San Francisco? No, that you were certain of those?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so you have turned this data upside down in all the ways that we've requested?
Yes.
Okay. Members, we have had this case before us a couple of times at this point. We've asked for searches to be done. Mr. Raffin and DPH have told us that they've done these searches. I understand Mr. Minette Shaw's frustration, and I understand his feeling that the information should have been gathered a particular way, but it seems based on what we've heard, it was not gathered that way. And so doing these searches, even manually, as Chair Wolf has pointed out, will not necessarily yield the results that he's looking for. it seems that the best hope for Mr. Manette-Shaw getting the information he's looking for is possibly having this legislation passed. But then again, I don't know if they're going to find that information for past periods if it was not tracked correctly in the first place. Given all of this, what do you propose that what do you propose that we do next?
While you are determining what your next steps will probably not involve, let me just put out a hypothetical for you to consider.
If you can say it briefly, we'll listen.
Okay, briefly. Assuming that, say, Mr. Wolf's relatives died and an ambulance chasing lawyer filed a lawsuit, do you really think the courts would accept DPH's claim? It has no way of being able to definitively determine where a patient, any given patient, or every given patient is discharged to.
Yeah, I don't know that was helpful, and there's a big difference between what is required for digging into information for an individual case versus compiling aggregate information. I hear what you're saying, and I understand that you're frustrated that this data isn't available, but I don't know that actually changes anything in terms of getting aggregate numbers.
I bet if a lawyer went after this data, a lawyer would get the data. I can almost guarantee it.
Well, then that may be the path to go, because we don't have that power. We don't have subpoena power. We don't have the ability. We can do what we can to compel the production of disclosure under CPRA. We've done that in this complaint. We can't ask people to speak under oath, but we take people as best as possible at their word. And I can't help if you're not satisfied with their response. I don't know what else that this body can do. You've got an active order of determination. We all know that sunshine complaints can be brought to a court. That's allowed by law. The purpose of this particular administrative local process is to help kind of suss out some of the issues or all of the issues that helps that move along. I don't know what more that the Sunshine Task Force can do.
Yeah, at this point, I don't know what more we can do. The only thing that I'm thinking is if this legislation passes, which requires DPH then to change its procedures and how it is handling information, I think there might be a possibility of, I don't know what will be compelled of the department and whether how much of that can be applied retroactively or if it's just going to change things going forward. If that legislation passes, is there, and I'm actually asking this because I don't know what we do at this point, if we take no further action now, but because this is a monitoring issue, if more information, more responsive information becomes available based on what that original request was, would we then take that up again as compliance, or does this then become a new request?
Well, it would. I don't know how to answer that. The question would it then be looking for the same information? If it's looking at the same information, then no. I mean, if this legislation passes, and then they're required to do this work, if they uncover information that leads back to this particular complaint, well, I think we'll have a different discussion at that time.
Yeah.
Can I offer something here? This is Allison again.
Sure. Oh, you're back. Sure.
I'm back. Yes. I mean, don't we have to respond to records that are at the time of the request? I'm not, and we're trying to close out requests too, not leave them open for future, retroactive inquiries. And so I'm just pushing back here a little bit on the idea that we would have to maybe do that, and instead, if we come to a point where we are able to produce these records, given changes in the system and possible legislation, then we would be looking at a new request at that time that we could be able to hopefully fulfill a little bit more easily.
Except Ms. Hawks, is if you are able to, if the system then reveals information that was available at the period of time Mr. Monette Shaw's request, and it was not provided to him now, but it was made available in the system later, there's some retroactive issues that can happen.
I think the implication then is that we're forever have to be forever responsive to whatever changes are in legislation, to go back and retroactively review all records requests. I'm just trying to tease out like what that would mean if we were to do that with other records requests or at a bigger scale, right? I think, how would we be continually, perpetually responsible for records based on changes in any kind of legislation?
The point here is that we have a complaint in front of us. You don't have complaints for other requests for the same issue. If there was a request for this issue and no complaint was brought forward, then that person may say, okay, I don't care about that information anymore. But now we have a complaint on file. The task force has compelled you to produce the records. The response that we're getting is that for, at least in the EPIC system, you only could produce one record. Okay. Now, if the city passes legislation that requires you to go back and scour through records and populate the current database with that information, and there's more than one record, then you have not satisfied the request that Mr. Monette Shaw put forward, nor would have satisfied our order of determination, which is why we have these monitoring sessions to determine if because there may be some evidence that the records do exist, but either not enough due diligence was done, or maybe it's too voluminous of a process to be able to get it done, or maybe it's the truth. There is only one record that you can produce out of it. That's kind of where we're at here.
So we would have to leave records requests open for potential future legislation that might retroactively cause a change in our ability to respond to those records.
It's only all we're saying here is it's really a matter of just the violation. Okay. And so if you're saying that if you say that there are no more responsive records that you can find in the work that you've done thus far, but then in 6 months, if and when this legislation passes, you then find 70 records, how do you reconcile that?
I mean,
Could I
No, do not interject. Ms.
I
Hawk.
mean, I would say, I mean, Mr. Monet Shaw is, you know, always welcome to open up. I mean, I'm sure he's tracking this legislation carefully. He's always open to open up a new records request that would initiate the finding of those records. I'm just concerned about leaving records requests open. I mean, we're trying to close things out and move on to new requests. And so,
Right.
you know, having to leave requests open and put that burden on, you know, the future custodian of these records and to have to go back and think about fulfilling them. I'm not sure how practical that is, or, you know, even if that's really required in the law in terms of, you know, you're supposed to be responsive to records at the time in which the request was made. If we can't be there, if we don't have responsive records at the time in which the request was made, I'm not understanding how that applies to perpetually to the future.
So here's the, no, Mr. Minette-Shaw, please, you cannot interject. The point here is that if the same work you would have had to do when the request was made is the same work that you're going to have to do in the near future, okay, then why did you not find the same information? How do you reconcile that discrepancy? That's my question. So it's really more about did you actually do enough diligence for Mr. Monet-Shaw's request? Because if it produces fruit in the future for the same information that you're going to have to do this same work for, that becomes an issue. It's not a matter of whether you have to fulfill past requests or not. It has nothing to do with that, per se. What this has to do with is, did you actually do due diligence for the request at the time of the request? That you're going to have to research the same batch of information for in the near future.
And I'm going to say that, I mean, we don't know what's happening with this legislation. I myself haven't even read it. So I think we're talking a bit in hypotheticals here about what it will say and do. Until it's passed, we just don't know.
Correct.
I'm trying to tell you what it says.
No, Mr. Minette-Shaw, please, it's not having a 2- or 3-way conversation here, okay? Please, this is a facilitated discussion.
I'm sorry. I would say we have been responsive to the records at the time of the request. I mean, I know we were late, but we are at this point in time, we've produced what we're able to produce. And we would like to close out this request and be, you know, I'm sure that Mr. Monet Shaw will come back and make another request. And if the legislation has an impact there, we will be responsive to, you know, to those records that going forward. And I think we have done what is required of us at the time of the request and fulfilling the record that we were able to provide at the time of the request.
I'm trying to concur.
Okay, Mr. Minette-Shaw, what you have something to say? Go ahead, briefly.
Thank you. The legislation being considered on first reading today, apparently sometime after midnight, reads that
please don't read the whole thing.
I'm not going to. I'm going to read you the pertinent thing so that DPH can close the damn records request. I'm trying to be helpful.
Okay, go ahead. So
the reporting hospitals will have to submit a report annually to DPH by January 31st of the preceding calendar year, except that the submission deadline for calendar year 2021 shall be October 1st, 2022. So I'm not going to be coming back and asking for data that you claim you can't find for the period in 2020. I will be coming back to ask you where the 2021 data is, whether you have to collect it manually or not. But it's not as if the legislation being introduced this afternoon and voted on is going to require retroactive reporting for data periods way back in the past. I'm not going there. They are not going there. As far as I'm concerned, if the task force is throwing in the towel, then DPH might as well go ahead and close out this particular request.
I think we might need to close this particular request. And I think based on all of these conversations and the time that all of the parties have spent with us trying to find the requested information, I hope there's a clear understanding that Mr. Manette-Shaw is going to be requesting this information going forward and not predicting the future about what's going to happen with the legislation. It seems as though there's some broader interest in having this information. So I hope that the department will be able to respond to requests going forward. Members, anything else to say on this, or should we? Okay, do we need a motion to close the file, or do we just not continue with compliance?
We should have
with monitoring. Excuse me.
We should have a motion. I am trying to think of the correct wording. That
Thank you.
Something to the effect that the department has. Do you believe the department has complied with the request of the task force?
I believe that the department has complied with the request of the task force to do additional searches for the information that was sought in the original records request.
So I would suggest that you find that the department has complied with the request of the task force and to close the file.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion that the department has complied with the request of the task force and make a motion to close the file.
I will second that motion.
Okay, members, any other discussion on this motion before we open it for public comment? Okay. Thank you, petitioner and respondents on this. Mr. Young, if you could please open this up for public comment, that would be great.
Yes, are there any members of the public who wish to provide public comment on this matter?
Anonymous number 3.
Okay. Hearing nobody else, Mr. Anonymous, please proceed.
Sure. Thank you very much. This is Anonymous number 3. I'd say it's. I guess the DPH representative understands the concept of having to respond at the time of the request only when it is helpful for them. Because clearly they do understand that clause, but only in this complaint. I would say this doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and it doesn't seem consistent with what you have done in the past. The Public Records Act did not become somehow only effective once computer databases existed that made it easier to search by structured data. This same request could have been made before we had computer databases and EHRs, and they would have to look through the discharge papers. In fact, these kinds of requests did exist long before computer databases were the primary way of searching records, and the Public Records Act wasn't somehow less effective back then. Other agencies have come and told you and courts, for example, for police misconduct records, that it requires manual review of decades and decades of records because they were never indexed by structured fields regarding what kind of misconduct occurred. And it is true, and still both courts and this task force have ordered full production of such records. I'm not sure why it would be different in this case. If anything, this is still easier. You could conduct near text search queries, which are a standard thing in all full text columns of any database, for, say, the cities right outside San Francisco. The fact that you can't give a perfect answer does not mean you don't have to give the best that is possible. And it is possible to search for, say, the cities that surround San Francisco or the county that surrounds San Francisco in those full text fields. Yes, Mr. Manette-Shaw won't get everything, but at least he'll get more than what he has. So it's very confusing and frankly disappointing that you are making this decision that seems not consistent with other decisions you have made. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anonymous. You are so right on.
We don't need comments on the comments.
You're going to get them anyway.
Mr. Young, please call for additional public comment.
Are there any other members of the public for public comment? I do not hear any additional public commenters. Would you like me to take a vote on the motion?
Let me ask the committee members any further thoughts, or shall we take the vote? Please call the vote.
Yes, on that motion, Chair LaHood.
Aye.
LaHood, aye. Member Wong.
Aye.
Wong, aye. Member Wolf.
Aye.
Wolf, aye. The motion passes without objection.
Thank
Next
you,
on the
everyone. I just want to say thank you. We appreciate you taking the time to go through this process with us. Next item, please.
Yes, next on the agenda is announcements, comments, questions, and future agendas items by members of the Compliance and Amendments Committee.
Members, do we have any proposals for future topics to discuss within this committee? Not at this time. Please call the next item.
Yes, next on the agenda is item number 7, adjournment.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded.
We have a first, we have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion passes without objection. The meeting is adjourned at 7:14 p.m.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate you being here today.
Bye-bye.